Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse open to over $200 million worldwide, while The Little Mermaid dropped 58% domestically and is still making next to nothing internationally. And let's just say that film is essentially guaranteed to not only flop, but also to be a massive flop for Disney, and could ultimately be one of the worst performing movies in their entire history. Now, of course, this is all on the fact that many people, when looking at the box office, are failing in the comparisons, especially to Aladdin, to remind themselves that the ticket prices back in 2019 were very different than what they are today. And then also, of course, as everyone loves to always hear, and it's when everyone loves to get triggered by, the rate of inflation has changed as well. Before we go any further, though, please make sure to smash that like button, live that fire button on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So over on Deadline, we got Nancy, and she's talking here about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which, if you've not seen my review on the channel, you know that overall I have a lot of positive things to say about the film. There's also a lot of negative things too, especially when it comes to the runtime on it. And again, it's not simply because of the runtime being the runtime, it's because you are feeling that runtime, and ultimately a lot of films are kind of falling into that trap where you don't need to have that much of the movie. You don't need to have that much of the exposition. You don't need to have that much as far as the length and runtime of specific scenes before it becomes the point of just overindulging. But as you can see here, the headline from Deadline, or at least the article from Deadline, Columbia Pictures and Sony Animation, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has swung to $208.6 million. Don't you always love the puns that they use on their, in their articles? This is an extra remarkable as it marks Sony's best animated launch of all time, without adjusting for inflation. Of course, the international box office debut was $88.1 million ahead of early projections and 2.8 times Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in like-for-likes, excluding China. And of course, that's going to be the ultimate story, is whether or not this film's box office internationally is only coming from China, or if it's coming from other parts of the world. Right now, it's actually having a pretty healthy mix from various parts and from various different aspects of the world, including the domestic marketplace, but it is still making around $20+ million in from China. And we always call that out here on the channel and remind everybody that, guess what, roughly 75% of the entire box office that is made in China goes to support the CCP. And that is something that should always be called out, especially when we know these studios do not need to work with the Communist Party in China in order to make money on their films, especially since all the money they make in China is usually fool's gold, because of how little they actually get in the return on investments. What I also find quite interesting is that really not a whole lot has been actually mentioned in this article when it comes to, this is actually something that's been added since last night. So when I came in late last night, by the way, thank you to everybody for their patience and waiting for this video, for those that have. And one thing I noticed was that even as of last night when I was recording my Geeks and Gamers box office breakdown was, hey, wait a minute, you're not really talking a whole lot about The Little Mermaid. So they were seemingly dragging their feet a little bit reporting on that one. But as it says right here, for The Little Mermaid, it had a better than expected hold at 34% in the international markets with 42.3 million. So they're trying to spin this in a positive direction, saying, well, look, it only dropped 58% domestically and it only dropped 34% internationally. But then they failed to recognize and they failed to mention just how low that international number was, right? You can have a strong hold, but if your opening weekend, especially compared to the massive budget you had on your movie, is very small, then a strong hold doesn't really mean all that much. I mean, we can go ahead and look to a film like Dungeons & Dragons. That movie had pretty strong holds after the fact. That movie actually performed pretty well because there was some pretty good word of mouth going on for that film. The problem, though, was that, one, the film cost a lot more than it needed to, and two, that upfront opening weekend number was not a whole lot. And so when that is your metric, when that is what you're basing your percentage on, even if you have a strong percentage, if that first number is not very, very good, then having a strong hold does not necessarily mean that your film is doing all that well. It goes on to say that the international cume is now $140.5 million internationally, which brings a $326 million global. Midweeks were good, with Monday to Thursday producing 62% of the opening weekend, a better percentage than Beauty and the Beast, Jungle Book, Cinderella, and Maleficent. The only difference and the primary difference between The Little Mermaid and all the other films that you just mentioned, all those other movies made money. And that's not going to be the case for Little Mermaid, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Looking at the actual numbers for the domestic opening or the domestic weekend for this past weekend, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in its opening weekend made $120.5 million. Now, just as a point of comparison, The Little Mermaid barely made $100 million on the holiday weekend for the 3-day. And even when you expand that out to the 4-day, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse still made more money. So you're looking, interestingly enough, at only about a 7-theater difference between The Little Mermaid and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And what that helps to show is that, hey, guess what? Sony is whooping your butt, Disney. Sony is doing so much better at the box office than you could ever hope to. Not to mention, they are spending a lot less money on their movies. They spent $100 million on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The last Spider-Verse film cost $90 million. When you adjust for inflation, it comes out to be roughly around $100 million. So they are obviously being a lot more careful and a lot more purposeful with how they're spending their money. Whereas Little Mermaid, any of the other Disney live actions, any of the Disney animated, cost a minimum of $200 million these days. And most of the time when we go to see those movies, we say, where's this money even going? Well, it's clearly not on the visual effects, because we've seen other films with just as many visual effects, which have been able to be made for a lot less money. Not to mention the visual effects that they do end up using, we end up asking the question of why? Why would you even waste the time and waste the money on something that, the uncanny valley effect is never going to be good enough for us to be able to not look past? Especially when you have human faces talking underwater, for instance. I know, River. I know. She's tired of these, so-called live-action remakes as well. You're then having in the number 3 spot another technically Disney movie, 20th Century Studios here, The Boogeyman, making $12.3 million. This film also costs probably a little bit more than what it should, and who knows whether or not the film's going to break even or not. We'll have to look at the numbers next weekend to see for sure whether that's going to happen. Coming in the number 4 spot is Guardians of the Galaxy, really the only bright spot for Disney over the past several months, as this film continues to have strong holds from, again, a much stronger than expected opening weekend, but also has been able to perform well domestically and internationally and having a pretty good 50-50 split, whereas with a film like Little Mermaid, it is predominantly being money made in the domestic market rather than international. And even though that might be good on paper because they get a higher percentage back from that domestic total, overall, they still need to make a certain amount of money worldwide to break even, and it's not looking like they're going to hit that number at this point in time. Fast 10 is also a movie that's probably not going to hit its break even either. As you can see, it's continuing to bleed money domestically. This movie is actually performing quite abysmally. If you actually look at the 3-week total, all right, this is the 3-week running total for it domestically, $128.4 million. Look at how much Little Mermaid has made in 2. I mean, Little Mermaid's not doing very well as far as its worldwide numbers. Domestically, it's doing okay. But notice how small it is, how much less it is compared to that movie. Even look at Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. After 1 week, $120.5 million. So Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has made in 1 week what it's taken essentially Fast 10 to make in 3. So that just shows you how weak this film is and how weak this franchise has become domestically. Some people have pointed out, well, it's never been a domestic franchise before, and yet one of the best performing films in the Fast and Furious franchise made a roughly $300 million here in the States. So clearly they've lost quite a bit of audience in the domestic marketplace. In addition, remember, this is not even accounting for the current rate of inflation when it comes to ticket prices and ticket sales, because when you include that number in, a lot less people are going to see these films domestically compared to anywhere else. And the international numbers aren't getting that much better. Again, they're much better than it is domestically, but ultimately we're seeing a huge loss in market share when it comes to the Fast and Furious franchise. Super Mario Brothers movie has actually finally crossed $1.3 billion. It continues to have pretty strong holds even after 9 weeks of release. Finally starting to be put out of theaters though, because it is available on demand. But still, the fact that it's performing as well as it is, being on demand, hey, kudos to them for being able to pull that off. About My Father, Robert De Niro movie, 51% drop, and is likely to be a flop because not a lot of people are going to see it, and it costs more than it probably should. The Machine, also 65% drop there. I've heard some mixed things about the film overall, but $1.7 million after 2 weeks based on its budget, probably going to be a flop there. You heard my feelings from A24, another one of these A24 releases. Who knows how that's going to do, because it's hard to follow and hard to track those films, especially when they don't always report their budgets right away. And then Kandahar rounding out the top 10, and 67% drop in its second week of release, already being dropped from 368 screens, and usually you don't see any change whatsoever in week 2. Notice these 3 right here, no change in their theater counts. And again, that's because typically the studios will make deals with the theaters so that the first 2 weeks are pretty much going to be the same. So the fact that they've been dropping it now from 368 screens tells me, okay, yeah, Kandahar not really doing all that well, not doing all that much money, and is probably going to end up being a flop for them, though they are not reporting any budgets for that movie. But even at a minimum of, $10 million, the film actually still won't even hit that, which is pretty abysmal. Going to the worldwide numbers, we have, again, Across the Spider-Verse, $208.6 million, so a very impressive number there. But it is, again, also important to point out, and again, this chart will update for those that maybe follow the numbers and say, wait, why doesn't their math add up when you look at the international totals? And the reason why is because they update these over the course of the next couple of days. So they'll get the raw total, the raw number that's being reported, and then they'll actually break down into their charts what the film made in each subsequent country. So that's made more than $120,000 so far in China. And that's the reason why some people say, wait, why does it only account for, a little over $200,000 here, but then it says $87 million here? What does that mean? Well, again, this $87.8 million has not been allocated yet. All right. So this money will eventually be divvied up into the countries that it has opened in. And this is just, again, all about data entry and trying to make sure that things are correct for those that have always wondered why it takes a little while for that to actually happen. But again, this only having cost $100 million, this film is already 2.1 times its budget. As you know, the break-even point, that magic number is typically around 2.5 to 3 times the budget, and that means that this movie will easily cross the 2.5 times the budget, probably sometime over the course of this week, and then by next weekend, especially, will be able to not only cross that, but also has a chance of getting very close to even that 3 times multiplier if that is your own break even. If we actually go ahead and compare this film to the Into the Spider-Verse, the first film back from 2018, you'll notice here how much better this film is actually doing, right? So $51 million opening day versus 14. $37 million Saturday versus 14, $31 million first Sunday versus 11. These are the kind of numbers that you want to see. These are the kind of numbers that Little Mermaid was not actually getting. So, hey, kudos to them, and they're likely going to see a very strong first Monday and a first week. And again, the word of mouth on this film has been very, very palpable, has been very, very strong. And hey, kudos to them for being able to make a pretty fun movie. Going ahead and looking at The Little Mermaid, comparing this film to Aladdin, because again, a lot of people are not comparing these films in for dollar value, and that's a very important factor. You could also do the same thing with ticket sales. This is something that I found in doing these comparisons and also in focusing on inflation, is that if you actually focus on inflation, you'll notice that, hey, it does essentially the same thing as if you were to look at the average ticket price and then divide that out. And so what does that mean? It means, hey, whether you're looking at average ticket sales or the projected ticket sales for a movie, or you're adjusting for inflation, it all works out to be roughly the same. And what we see is that Aladdin costing a little over $200 million in today's dollars versus the $250 million behemoth of The Little Mermaid. Oh boy. Remember the report last weekend was, hey, Aladdin did not have as big of an opening weekend as Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid had a bigger opening weekend. Yes, when you did not adjust for inflation. The fact is, only the first Friday actually had a higher number for The Little Mermaid, and this probably comes down to having more of those Thursday previews versus Aladdin and having more access to that, and obviously a massive marketing campaign, a much bigger marketing campaign than that of Aladdin. Even the fact that it has a $50 million advantage budget-wise compared to Aladdin means that they spent at least another 25 million or so on marketing compared to Aladdin, and so ultimately it makes sense that, hey, if you're spending more money on marketing, you probably should expect to have a higher than expected opening weekend. However, the fact that it then drops off well below the numbers for Aladdin shows you, yeah, looks like that was probably money well wasted. If you look at the actual comparables to where they were at the same point in the release, looking at the second Sunday numbers here, the most recent numbers, $186 million domestically versus where was Aladdin? $211. So this film is far, is falling pretty far behind the pace of where Aladdin ended up. Aladdin ended up making $400 million here domestically. So I would suspect, based on the tracking and based off the percentage, we're looking at this movie maybe being able to get to $300 million domestically. Maybe. We still have to wait and see if that's even going to happen yet. But ultimately, $300 million domestically might sound decent on paper, especially when you compare it to a film like Fast 10. But look at the international number. All right, the Aladdin movie back in 2019 made $788 million internationally. So far, Little Mermaid has only made $140, and that means that you're looking at a film. What if you get to best case scenario for domestic, maybe $350 million best case scenario? You're looking at what international best case scenario, $250. Is that being generous? I think You add those numbers up, that doesn't get you to 625 million, which is its break-even point. So yeah, not a good look overall for The Little Mermaid going forward. The Boogeyman also coming from Disney, $20 million. So again, for a smaller film, you would say, hey, that sounds pretty good. But we'll see the numbers there and see that it still has a little ways to go. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, $780 million worldwide. This film has now officially crossed the where Thor 4 Love and Thunder had ended up. So hey, kudos to them for being able to beat out Thor Love and Thunder. This is a far superior film to Thor Love and Thunder for sure, though it is, again, far from perfect itself, but it is still on its way to easily crossing the $800 million, and I think somewhere between $800 and $900 million will be its endpoint, and I wouldn't be surprised if this film even got all the way up to Wakanda Forever levels of $850 million, and so clearly still not a healthy sign for the MCU, but for Guardians, no one was expecting much from this movie, so the fact that it's made as much as it has, kudos to them for making a film that didn't completely suck. Fast 10, $603 million worldwide, but just keep in mind, 127.9, and this has not been updated with the most recent numbers, has come from China, and so, hey, that kind of split between domestic and international, not a healthy sign. They get a lot less return on their money when they look at the international box office versus the domestic, so the fact that it's performing not just better, but significantly better internationally is bad news for them. Let's just say Fast 10 also is on the way to flopping as well. Super Mario Brothers movie, $1.3 billion. Again, that's going to be probably the amount that it makes. It probably won't have enough gas to get to $1.4 billion at this point, but hey, kudos to them for making a film that was able to pay for pretty much all the subsequent releases that they might have in mind. About My Father, $8.8 million. I haven't really heard much of anything about this movie, but if I know anything about Robert De Niro, and I know anything about him, especially in this current era of his career, it's probably insufferable. The Machine. I just have no interest in seeing this movie. Some people like the guy who's the comedian. I have never really heard of him, actually, and so, hey, if that's your boat, $8.7 million is still not quite enough to make money back. Gandahar, same thing, $4.3 million, not enough. Evil Dead Rise is also still hanging around as well, just adding to its profits. So kudos to them for making that. If we go ahead and look at the box office charting, because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews, you can see we can finally start to talk about the numbers for Little Mermaid. So I imagine this is probably what some people have been waiting for. And again, apologies if it's taken a little bit longer today. But hey, I'm recording this after getting in late last night, so you're welcome. $326.7 million, though, is the 2-week running total for the international, for the worldwide numbers for The Little Mermaid. Now, let's go ahead and look at this thing historically. So if you've maybe never followed my chart before, I was able to break this down years ago that most movies will make either 70% of their entire box office within the first 2 weeks, or if they have a really strong legs, if they have a really strong performing box office, they'll make half of their entire box office in the first 2 weeks. There obviously are exceptions to this, but on average, the vast majority of films fall somewhere between the 70% and 50% number. So let's assume that the $326 million is 70% of the entire box office for The Little Mermaid. That means that the end result, so this is a very likely scenario for this movie, would be $466 million worldwide. A best case scenario, so let's say it doubles its money, best case scenario would be $650 million. That is a best case scenario. We already are seeing in the legs for this movie, it is not holding to that extent. It is not doubling, and it's not going to double what it has made so far. But even if it did, $650 million would be a minimal profit, and according to some metrics, would still be a financial loss. It really depends on whether your break-even's 2.5 or 3 times the budget. So even if it did, quote-unquote, make money, it would still not be nearly enough to make up for any discrepancies, right, in either direction. Because it would either be such a minimal profit that it really doesn't mean all that much in the first place, or it would still be a financial loss. What is more likely to happen? Somewhere around, I would say, $500 million is probably what this film could expect to have, especially based on the drops that we're seeing, with, I think, the best case for it actually being the average of around $550 or $560 million. What does that mean because of its massive $250 million budget? That means that right now I'm projecting the film to lose around $100 million, but could make as much as 17. And again, that's using a 2.5 multiplier. You could obviously see this film still lose money if it was a 3 times multiplier. On average, I suspect this film to lose somewhere between $50 and $100 million, and that is a minimum. That's not a maximum there, all right? That's a minimum, because remember that my charting and my break even are a lot more conservative than some other people's. And so what that means is, hey, this film is likely to be a flop. This film's chances of breaking even are next to nil, are really non-existent. And the question is going to be, how much money is this film actually going to lose? Let me know in the comment section what you think the actual break-even point is, or rather, what you think the total loss on this movie is going to be. Because at this point, yeah, it's guaranteed to lose money. The question is just how much. Looking at Across the Spider-Verse, as you can see, a break-even of $250 million at 208.6. That will easily pass that, easily reach that amount, probably by, before even next weekend it begins. The Boogeyman is still 40.5 million in the red. So this is where I get into the numbers here. So based on the budget, the break-even point for Boogeyman is around 87.5. And so 20 million might sound good on paper, but even with a very strong hold, I just don't see the film necessarily being able to reach that 87.5 million. We'll have to, of course, wait and see, and we'll continue to follow that number. When it comes to The Machine, based on its numbers right now after the second week of release, we can project that the film will lose somewhere around $20 million or so, having made only 6.7 at this point in time. It's break even around $50 million. About My Father, similar story, cost a little bit more, $72.7 million. This film will lose roughly around $30+ million at the box office. So, hey, good on you, Robert De Niro. $4.3 million for Kandahar means that we, because there's no budget being reported yet, cannot actually say how much it's going to lose. However, we can say it's going to cap out and top out somewhere around $6.2 to $8 million. So, yeah, not a lot of money. So even if the film cost $10 million, that still would be a huge financial loss, because remember, that $10 million is just the budget. That's not even the break even, right? It would still need to make, around $25 million to break even? So if it's going to max out around $8 million, you can do the math on that to see just how much money that would be as a loss. Again, Little Mermaid is set to be a massive failure. Fast 10, I'd already projected this last week or the week before, that this film would be a box office flop most likely. $75 million would be a worst case scenario for the movie based on historical standards, with a best case scenario being around $100 million in profit. It's looking, based on the numbers that we're seeing, like it's not going to be able to, have the type of hold that it would need to get to that point. So you're looking at this film, capping out somewhere around maybe $750 million worldwide. That's still far below the $850 million it needs. Remember, this film costs around $340 million production budget. So that's the reason why its break-even point is so high. Some people have the break-even as upwards of $1 billion. This film's definitely not going to get to $1 billion. This film's probably not even going to get to $850 million. And that means this film is essentially a guaranteed flop as we continuing to follow these numbers. But those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts about them? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, do you think that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, what do you think the overall end result's going to be? If we take the metrics, so this is something that I've been playing around with a little bit, so I have this other tab right here. It's the copy of the box office, so it doesn't have the most updated numbers. But what's something that I found was that when you look at the opening weekend, you'll notice that there's a pretty consistent theme here with these numbers, right? You're seeing a lot of threes, right? If you're actually looking at this, and I know that I'm going through it really quickly, but again, the video's been going on for a little bit long at this point. But you'll notice here that the all-around average, as far as opening weekend numbers versus the total box office it ends by, on average is around 35%. So that means roughly a third of a film's entire box office usually is made within the first week, for the opening weekend worldwide of the initial release. So if we think about that for a second, that about a third of one's box office is made, we can then actually project out at this point in time that if we look to a film like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, you take 208 times, multiply that by 3, we're looking at Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse having a decent chance of getting $600+ million at the worldwide box office. And again, it's not a guarantee, because obviously the film's opening weekend versus its end total can be all over the place, but if the film has very strong holds, and is able to especially hold in the midst of competition, you could see the film make that much money. What I can say, though, is based on that metric, even if the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse film does towards the lower end of its projections, because of that number, because of that metric, I can say with pretty much certainty, with a lot of certainty at this point in time, that I think Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse will easily be able to beat out The Little Mermaid. So what does that mean? Sony continuing to dominate the box office space, whereas Disney is continuing to lose, and to lose pretty big. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about that in the comment section down below as well. Oh man, I'm so tired. Thank you all again for putting up with this late box office breakdown. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, the fire button, obviously smash the rumble button as well. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my June Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Locals members at the Keeper, the Bifrost level, and above. Starting off first with Patreon, Father Luca Illich. Jaimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check it over at his YouTube channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. And again, thank you all very much for being my supporters. If you want your name shout out at the end of every live stream and every video, check out the top link in the video description below. You also can get access to things like a giveaways channel where I give away Blu-rays, 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff every single, most weeks in the month. I try to give away something, or at the very least towards the end of the month, I will make it up with several giveaways. Basically, most people are guaranteed to walk away with something at the end of every single month. So if you want access to that, again, check out the top link in the video description below, as well as access to an exclusive podcast. This past month, I was actually able to record a great podcast with Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment. So you want access to that and also a plethora of other content, check out the link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.